I've been wronged and I want my justice.
God and God's economy, mercy is the currency of grace and love, and I think that's really powerful. We see that here.
The righteousness and the holiness of this good God that had rules for when and how you could approach him, and like coming before the Holy of Holies, maybe once a year, you would come before God with fear and trembling because he was holy.
If you follow the recipe of the Beatitudes, this will lead to a life in which you can have a little bit of heaven on earth.
Hello, and thank you for joining us, and welcome to the Faith, Life, and Learning podcast from Los Angeles Pacific University. LAPU is a Christian university that believes in a holistic approach to learning and to faith. In these conversations, we hope to explore how faith impacts all aspects of our lives. Whether you are already a part of the LAPU community or a guest, we are glad you are here, and we hope you enjoy the conversation.
All right, the next one reads, "Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy."
Mercy is not the response that I think we are most inclined towards when we are wronged. The natural impulse is, that's not fair. Which do you hear that from? I hear that from my children all the time. That's not fair. Like from the earliest days, there's this idea of justice. I'm not getting my part, or they're getting something that they didn't deserve, or they're not getting something. The punishment or the retribution or you do something wrong, you should be punished. And mercy is the person who is in the position to dole out the penalty for the wrong that has been done, choosing willingly to not do that and to give you an opportunity for a different experience. And so the challenge here is on us to be the first one to not follow that human impulse of, I've been wronged and I want my justice. Justice meaning me turning the penalty, getting back what I deserve, or you getting penalized, and me choosing not to exact revenge or retribution or see that through, but I'm going to show you mercy. And when you live like that, how unexpected that is for those who witness it or those who experience it. And then you bring about that, whom amongst us has not made a mistake and done something wrong ourselves. And probably what I desired the most, even though I maybe knew I didn't deserve it, was mercy. Please, please, please don't give me the punishment that I know I deserve for whatever the wrong it might be or whom it was against. And how impactful that is when that person forgives and says, I show mercy to you, and you will reap the reward of people being merciful to you when you have done wrong.
Yeah, this one is upside down things where we often culturally like mercy. We want mercy, but we don't want to give mercy because it feels weak or we have to give up something. But really, God's economy, mercy is the currency of grace and love, and I think that's really powerful. We see that here.
I see an interesting contrast, as you said, the connection between culture and Christ. And when Christ says that you should show mercy, even if someone has wronged you, but in culturally speaking, that does show weakness. It makes the person doling out the punishment, and he doesn't dole out the punishment, and instead shows mercy. Makes it look like that person who doles out the punishment is afraid to give the punishment, and therefore shows mercy out of weakness, out of fear of how the other person would react. And so that would be the intersection of how Christ's thinking counteracted the natural impulse of what would happen in secular culture, where if I'm wrong, I will just hit back. I think that this one is to tell people to resist the urge of retribution and follow the more difficult path of forgiveness. To err is human, to forgive is divine. I don't even know. I don't think that's a Bible verse, though. But I do know it's a cliche. This is kind of like the golden rule. If you want people to show you mercy, you have to know how to show mercy too. Treat others as you want others to treat you. And the golden rule is, interestingly, is in every culture, every religion has a version of that. I find that fascinating.
Yeah, very much seems like it's been embedded into our DNA. And if you look at the theology of Genesis and that we were made in God's image, it kind of makes sense when you think about that. All right, great. Yeah, that's mercy, and that's a culture changer when you can show mercy, for sure.
And when Jesus tried to teach that to the disciples and to some of the followers, they did not just fully understand. He even had to explain it several times using different parables to get that across, because even in that culture, but you're supposed to be the Messiah. You're supposed to bring us out of the, get the Romans and kick them out, and take the Jews out of the Roman whatever. You're supposed to step all over them, crush the Romans, was what one believer said. And then Jesus said, no, I was brought here to teach you to love each other like brothers and sisters. Some people walked away thinking that's weakness. That's not a real Messiah. Real Messiah would be like Moses and gets his people out of Egypt. So they wanted Jesus to get them out of Rome, I think. And so some didn't believe for that reason. So I think there you have the intersection of cultural expectations versus what Jesus came. So he was a game changer.
The next beatitude is, blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. It's funny to me for me to think about this one. I think about purity, and it seems like within culture, purity has kind of had a falling out. Remember back in the 90s, like I kissed dating goodbye, and like some of the purity culture was en vogue amongst Christian circles, right? I think we all might remember that.
It was definitely a cultural moment. Yeah.
It had its moment. And I think there's been a rebelling from that, if my pulse is on the culture correct now. But here we do see Jesus bringing up pure in heart. And I don't know if there's a great analog to be made there with purity culture in America in the 90s, but I do, of course, see a significance there in our walk with Jesus that is, it's a little bit paradoxical too, because we know and we accept the grace of God, and we know that that is readily available. And to Brant's point, like his imputed righteousness is the only thing that gives us good standing with God. It's not what we do. It's not how we come before him clean of our own accord, but it's because he grants that to us, because he grants us forgiveness and salvation. However, we also know in like Old Testament stories and things of that there was a huge emphasis on the righteousness and the holiness of this good God that had rules for when and how you could approach him, and like coming before the Holy of Holies, maybe once a year, you would come before God with fear and trembling because he was holy and we were not. That all to say, this beatitude, I think, is getting at the importance of purity of heart and experiencing God. And to Brant's point, again, for thirsting and hungering for righteousness and experiencing Jesus, we don't want anything potentially blocking that or being a barrier to our experiencing God. And there's a Psalm 51, it says, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. Cast me not away from your presence, and take not your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation, and uphold me with a willing spirit. And so, again, this emphasis of having a clean heart. And I think about also Jesus' example of, before taking out the speck in your neighbor's eye, pull out the plank in your own. Like whatever is obstructing our ability to see things clearly, and in this case, seeing God clearly and purity of heart, That's something that you do not want a barrier towards. And so I think there's just an interesting balance there between seeking what is good and pure and right, and then also, of course, accepting the grace of God, which is readily available, but not wanting anything to obscure the goodness of God by how we are living or how we are thinking. Going back to mercy, like if we have thoughts of wanting vengeance towards another person, like that's not godliness. That might obscure us from seeing God truly, and anything like that we don't want. All right, let's get to our next one. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God.
So I think that being a peacemaker means seeking reconciliation and harmony, trying to bring people to an agreement, bringing people together, creating unity. And I think that when you are a peacemaker, you bring yourself closer to God, making you a child of God, because you believe in, you don't believe in violence. You don't believe that retribution is the way to go, and that forgiveness, mercy, love, grace, and being at peace, seeking harmony is the way to God. That's what drew me to this one, is because of all the wars you have in the world, and everyone is so against everyone. If everybody could just put down their arms, talk it out, find common ground, and find ways to make peace, that makes them, to me, closer to God. If everybody would think more like that, there would be so much less bloodshed, so much less violence and all of that. If you can see, Confucius once said that true wisdom comes when you can live for just a second or a minute on someone else's shoes or someone else's skin, depending on, I'm translating something from French as well, so sorry for that. The under the skin, sous le bout de quelqu'un, is French, but same idea is if you can walk in someone else's shoes. And I think that if we had that ability, and Christ had that ability, he had the ability to see into people's hearts, and therefore he was always trying to seek reconciliation, not just of conflict, but also the conflict within someone's heart. Let's say you feel guilty of a past sin, and he would try to reconcile you with God. And so Christ's whole purpose, to me, is he was the ultimate peacemaker by forgiving our sins, having a clean slate, uniting us with God so that we all become children of God. Because in order for us to be children of God, we can't have all that sin. We can't hold on to grudges and be angry and want to kill the next person or that sort of thing. And I think that Christ came to earth to wipe the slate clean of all of that so that we would all be children of God.
I connect this one in a sense to blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. There's this sense of aggression to this one, in that is, to a point, a natural way of life. Somebody wrongs me, I want to get back. Somebody throws a punch, and I want to punch back.
Right.
And there's an element of ownership in if you're involved in the conflict, but I think this one also invites external participants. There's the conflict itself, and then there is maybe somebody in the conflict chooses to stop it, or maybe somebody outside of the conflict steps in. I'm going to zoom in the circles to my own family dynamic. I have 3 daughters who will often antagonize each other to the point that there is aggression, either verbal or sometimes physical. And I challenge them at what it means to be the person to stop what is happening, whatever that is happening in the moment. Let's say it's one of or 2 of them are at each other's throat, metaphorically speaking, of course. But even the 3rd one has a responsibility, if they're present, to say, hey, stop, you 2. You can work this out. There's another way. I see an invitation to anybody in Blessed are the Peacemakers. If you are present in the midst of conflict, you have an opportunity to intervene in some way and offer something towards de-escalation to help bring about reconciliation. And in doing so, you are identified as one of God's own because you engage in the process of peacemaking, which is what Christ is admonishing us to do. And so you are with Christ if you are attempting to
Be
do
like-
that around you in your culture, in your family, in your neighborhood, with your friends at school, with whatever group you're a part of.
Yeah, and to Yvonne's point, God was the original peacemaker with us. He has offered peace towards his children who have been sundered from his goodness and righteousness by choosing to sin, and has restored that relationship back to us. When he sees us doing things in that vein, he can look at us and smile and say, "That's my child." And there's it seems like there's a lot of conflict nowadays, and perhaps not as many voices trying to make peace. So we could stand to have a lot more of that. All right. Our last beatitude is, "Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven."
Yeah, this one's interesting to me. It's hard, it's challenging. It reflects back at the first beatitude. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And now, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So we're kind of bookended with this idea of the blessing of the kingdom of heaven, both in the difficulty and the hardness and the reality of being poor in spirit, and then also this idea of persecution. And I was also thinking about this in light of coming out of being a peacemaker. And oftentimes it's hard because it even happened in his own life. Jesus, his perfect, sinless, righteous, grace-filled, healing life was repugnant to people, that to the point of persecution and death, right, and murder. And he's inviting his disciples into this life that is promised comfort and promised fulfillment and mercy and grace and even the kingdom of heaven. And yet in the midst of that, it will rub people the wrong way. And there's a statement, a declaration of persecution. And we go on in verse 11, "Blessed are you when people insult you, when people say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Actually rejoice and be glad, because your reward is great in heaven, for the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." It's hard to hear that one of the markers of following Jesus will be insults and persecution. And I think part of that is the reality of the brokenness of the world that we still live in. In the way of Jesus, we find life and grace and love and hope. And we're contending with that in a world that is still so much wrapped up in evil and in wars and in hurt. And so there's this tension of leaning in and being the peacemaker, of drawing close to Jesus, of living a life that demonstrates grace and love, and also kind of having a reality check on that. Just because I do a lot of good things and try and be like Jesus doesn't mean bad things aren't going to happen. Doesn't mean life won't be difficult. Jesus is reminding his followers and all of us that he's not a genie, that we don't follow him and then just kind of expect life to be great. It's really a call to what's in our heart and what are we willing to experience in order to testify to the reality of the love of Jesus in the world. So there's this paradox that we have to hold. And yet I think there's always this blessing and this promise for those who are persecuted, of the kingdom of heaven, and this ultimate promise of safety and of thriving in abundance. So yeah, that's a hard one.
That's a good point to maybe give some final thoughts. And I mean, going through a lot of these are hard, right?
Yeah.
And it paints a picture of suffering.
Yeah.
That the kingdom of God and following after Jesus, like, there's going to be persecution, there's going to be poorness of spirit, there's going to be suffering. And I guess in kind of putting a final stamp on this, what do you think is the invitation for our listeners to step into this life? What do you think is the compelling point, just because we know that he's Jesus and it's right to follow him and our reward is in heaven? Are there any maybe that's the answer, and that is good. But are there also compelling and inviting aspects of this life now and for this world, and that can create a better life and a better culture because we're following this?
I might look towards blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy as maybe a glimmer of light of hope, in that I think deep down there is a desire to live in a world where this is the way. And if we truly lived like this, what a safe place that would be, to be known that there is comfort and mercy and peace. And so it's an invitation and a reassurance that God's kingdom, whether we experience that in this mortal life or not, you can be assured that that is what your final outcome will be. But that still makes it worth striving towards, because if you can begin to live this way, then you will also start to see others living that way. And I would crave mercy for myself. I would crave to be comfort in the midst of mourning. And I want to live in a peaceful space. People who have purity of heart in their motivations and are able to let go of their ego. What a wonderful neighborhood that would be to live in. If me and all of my neighbors and their families and the kids, we would have so much fun just playing and supporting each other and encouraging each other and offering assistance and being there when you need a shoulder to cry on and to celebrate with. And I think that's what this all leads to, if somebody is willing to take that first step and counter their human impulses.
Right. These are the things that actually transform the culture.
Yes.
There's this hope towards the end that Jesus gives us, the kingdom of heaven. But he also talks about the kingdom of heaven is here and now. And it's how we live into it. And these are the actions of Jesus followers that transform their families and their neighborhoods and their cities. And these places, like, the world can be different right now. And the invitation is to experience the presence of God's kingdom at work in our world and our lives. And that invitation that's ultimately full of hope to transform the world around us through the truth and the reality. These promises are bigger than any trend, right? Any cultural kind of moment we're in. These are the things that are timeless and that Jesus continues to call us into, to love and embrace and care for those around us.
I think these Beatitudes are like if you follow the recipe, of the Beatitudes, this will lead to a life in which you can have a little bit of heaven on earth.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that is a perfect wrapping up thought. And I'm going to try and paraphrase it again, but that when we are doing these things, they are difficult, they are hard. There's going to be moments of suffering because not everyone is going to be subscribing to these same rules that we are. However, they are going to create a ripple effect in your neighborhood and in your world. And one by one, that domino effect, hopefully people will see the goodness of that way and choose to follow that way as well. And it will be a more beautiful world that you're living in. Because you suffered momentarily, you are now changing the culture for a longer time and something that's more stable and lasting. And your Heavenly Father who sees you smiles and calls you his child. And I think that's also been just part of the solace that Christians have had in Christian community since the beginning, right? When you are among your community, you are in that place, hopefully. You are in that safe place and that transcendent place where you're living into these things and you see that it's good and you taste that it's good. May we all go and hopefully do likewise and be strong in the midst of the opposition, because it is out there, but to change your culture for good every step of the way.
Thanks for listening to the Faith, Life, and Learning podcast from Los Angeles Pacific University. If you enjoy these conversations and would like to hear more, please subscribe to our podcast by clicking on the subscribe button. For more information about Los Angeles Pacific University, please visit our website at lapu.edu. Learn and live fully.